Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Aviation Law. Now, in this episode, our focus will be on how do we set up and maintain a safety management system. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Zaf, and I am a licensed air traffic controller. I've been licensed for more than 20 years now, and I've cleared Air Force One for landing and welcomed President Barack Obama to Jamaica in 2015. I'm also a lawyer, so based upon my background, I should understand at least a little bit about the technical workings of safety management systems and also the legal underpinnings. All right, before we dive into the subject matter, I want to touch on what is in the news over the past couple of days because we see that catastrophic situation in Washington where we had that a mid-sized commercial jet colliding with a Black Hawk helicopter, and wow, that will let anybody call on their God. What we're saying is that based upon safety management systems that ought to be in place, these sort of collisions must not happen. So there's clearly some failure in the safety management system. Now, that's what we call the Swiss cheese effect when we carry out risk assessments, where in the system there can be holes and there can be more than one holes and more than one gaps. And these holes represent risk in the safety management system. And in the Swiss cheese situation, we have a set of holes, and whenever we have those holes, yes, are lined up, so to speak, we have all of those risks passing through, and it can result in catastrophe. And certainly, that's what happened in that situation. We'll wait on the investigation to come out, and certainly we will make some comments on this channel based upon what we learned from the investigation. Now, let us dive into safety management systems. I've done a video before talking about Annex 19. Now, Annex 19 of the International Civil Aviation Organization talks about safety management and nation states, putting in place safety management system regulation in which aviation operators must abide by having safety management systems in place that meet those regulations. So, just an overview of the Annex 19 of the International Civil Aviation Organization. It has four main pillars, as we know: safety policy, yes, okay, and then risk assessment, safety assurance, which is the same thing as safety audits, and safety promotion. Okay, so let us take a look at what EQ Annex 19 has to say in terms of states carrying out their legislative and regulatory duty in terms of maintaining a safety management system. Looking at the manual, EQ Annex 19. As I said, I did a video on it already, but we're just diving in. And what it is saying concerning primary aviation legislation. And it actually says states shall promulgate a comprehensive and effective aviation law commensurate with the size and complexity of their aviation activity and consistent with the requirements contained in the Convention on International Civil Aviation to enable the oversight and management of civil aviation safety and the enforcement of regulations through the relevant authorities or agencies established for that purpose. And it continues. It says aviation law shall, and we all know what shall means. Shall mean that you must, it's a mandate that must be met. Shall provide personnel performing safety oversight functions, access to aircraft operations, facilities, personnel, and associated records as applicable of individuals and organizations performing an aviation activity. Now, because the degree at which the International Civil Aviation Organization takes safety, it goes further in terms of pointing out that there should be not only primary legislation, but there must be also particularized particularize regulations. And it continues and it says, states shall promulgate regulations to address, at a minimum, national requirements emanating from the primary aviation legislation for standardized operational procedures, products, services, equipment, and infrastructure in conformity with the annexes to the Convention on International Civil Aviation. Now, I've done a video in terms of I went through all the annexes starting from Annex 1 has to do with personal licensing all the way through to Annex 19. You can go back and have a look at that. But what it is actually saying, for each of the annexes, there must be a regulation. So for instance, let's take the regulation for air navigation service providers. So we all know that there's six regulated organizations. We have aircraft manufacturers, aircraft maintenance people, we have airline operators or aircraft operators. They must have safety management systems. We have air navigation service providers, which are air traffic control and communication, navigation and surveillance operation entities, and we have airport operators and training organizations. So let us look at air navigation service providers. And air navigation service providers, they must have a regulation that relates to that. So I have been looking at a lot of regulations. For instance, I've been looking at regulation in the Americas. And when I said Americas, I'm not talking the United States. I'm talking all of the Americas, from the North Pole to the South Pole in the Americas. And what I've realized, that some aviation authorities have regulations that are more than 10 years old, that they have not updated. Annex 19 came out in 2013, and there have been several updates. These regulations must be updated each and every time the International Civil Aviation Organization publish an update. So there must be a situation where there's constant monitoring of the International Civil Aviation Organization publications, and there must be impact assessments, there must be updates to the regulations, and notices must be sent out to the operators so they can update their safety management system accordingly. So I'm telling you what I've seen in some jurisdictions within the Americas. I will tell you that here in the UK has adopted the regulations from the European Union. So the Aviation Authority for the European Union is the European Aviation Safety Agency, yes. And the European Union have some excellent regulations, and they update their regulations in a very, very timely way. And I think maybe that is the reason why there's a high degree of safety for aviation operators in Europe. There are some messy situations. I can tell you that I've seen those things in operation here in the UK. But in terms of regulations and current regulations, the best that I've seen so far are those coming out of the EU. So commendation for what is happening uh, by the European Union, and we really admire what is going on, and many states need to take a page out their book. Okay, so when we talk about regulation, it goes further and it says the term regulation is used as in a generic sense, and includes but not limited to instructions, rules, edits, yes, because the International Civil Aviation Organization does edits, directives, set of laws, requirements, policies, and orders. So it pretty much is quite wide, and we need to have designated personnel that carry out this sort of work in terms of maintaining the safety management system. Now, what this means is that the aviation authorities, they're called civil aviation authorities, they're called, in the United States, it's called Federal Aviation Authority. The aviation authorities set the tone in terms of safety management, and the aviation operators ought to follow that. So set the tone as a leader. The aviation authorities are the leader. And we all know when leaders set a good tone. Like, for instance, Barack Obama, President Barack Obama. Person said that he set a good tone as a president. He was intelligent, he's approachable, he's diplomatic. And then we have other presidents like, okay, let me stop it. I don't want to lose my visa. But you get the gist of what I'm saying. So, aviation authorities set the tone. Okay, so let us spend some time now in terms of diving into the substance in terms of what a safety management system must look like. So, whichever of the six aviation organizations that must have safety management systems, there is a particular structure uh, that can be followed in terms of setting up the system because the systems are quite similar. There are differences. So, for instance, the system for air navigation service provider, air traffic controllers, communication, navigation, surveillance, engineering, operating companies is different from an airport operator. So, the airport operator would have their airport manual, for instance, and the air traffic providers would have their manual of air traffic services. So these are some technical specific manuals for the type of organizations. But for instance, like safety manual, there is something which is generic about it. So a safety manual, so to speak, would contain the safety policy, and many a times we go into aviation organizations, well, even other organizations, and we see policies. So we talk about safety policies. Normally, like a one-page summary document that is placed somewhere within the organization at a conspicuous place that is easily seen by the public and everyone, just to operate as a reminder. And there are certain things that must be captured within that safety policy. So we must have an accountable manager, the accountable person. It doesn't mean that the person who is accountable carry out all the responsibilities because in big organization, the head person cannot carry out everything and see everything what is going on. But that head person must be aware and must be accountable to answer to what is happening within that organization. So it must have an accountable manager. It must have what we call a commitment to ensure that there is adequate resources to run the organization. Adequate resources, yes, there must be sufficient money, but adequate resources have to talk about the functional system in terms of ensuring that there is appropriate equipment. So, for instance, an aircraft maintenance organization that pull down the engine and change the tires and pull out the avionics and pull down the tank and clean it up and put it up back. They have to have the right equipment to do it. You don't want somebody come with a big hammer and boom, boom, knocking off the tire, and then it slack up some screws under the carriage, and that cause problem. You have to have the right equipment in terms of doing the work. Um, you have to have competent personnel. So the persons who are carrying out the work have to be properly trained. So in terms of putting someone in the air traffic control tower to work, you don't get someone off the street and say, hey, 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 you have the right skin color. You have the right skin color. You have the right color teeth. I'm going to put in it. No, that person have to work, have to pass their exam, have to pass their medical and prove themselves to be competent to work in the air traffic control tower. So you have to have right proper equipment, you have to have competent personnel, and then you have to have the proper procedures in place. And from time to time, the procedures have to be reviewed. So, for instance, in air traffic control, all air traffic controllers know that we have like stars and SIDS, standard arrival routes and standard departure routes, and sometimes these things have to be updated, depend on aircraft performance, and it depends on a lot of variables. And there are other stuff in terms of that needs to be updated accordingly. So all these things need to be in the safety policy. Accountable manager, commitment in terms of having those resources in terms of carrying out that duty, and that safety policy must be signed by the accountable manager because we cannot have a safety policy in place and the accountable manager don't know about it. Now, let me move on to what else needs to be in safety manual. So we talk about risk assessments. We're going along the framework of the four pillars within the Annex 19. Yes. the four pillars, as we say: safety policy, risk assessment, safety assurance, and safety promotion. So we're now at risk assessment. Now, risk assessment involve a lot. It involves carrying out risk because aviation involve a lot of hazards. We get so comfortable in flying in the sky, we almost forget that it involves a lot of risk, and there is a lot of hazards, and those risks have to be properly managed and mitigated. And if we really just get too complacent, things can go wrong. So in terms of risk, one of the other thing that we have to talk about is change management, because sometimes when we change something, things can go wrong. So we have to have a proper change management process. Because, for instance, we may have a head of an organization, and that head is going on retirement, and a new person coming in as the head. Is there a change management process to manage that change? Because that new person coming in may not be fully aware in terms of certain thing that is happening, and that in of itself can create risk. So we need to have change management procedure and also a change management register. Another thing we need to talk about, because when it come on to managing safety, there's a lot of documentation, and we have to get the documentation right. We have to have the evidence to prove that we are doing things well. So we have to have a proper document control procedure, and we need to have what we call a master index, or a document register. So all the documents within the organization is on that register. So whenever anyone within the organization go to that register, they can see all the documents. There is no operational documents that must be in place with persons saying, I never I never know that document exists. The first time I hear about it. No. We should have a system where persons, whenever there's an update to a document, all operational personnel, they actually sign and acknowledge that they are in receipt of that document and they have read that document. So it is a check and balance and a tight procedure. But in some organization, the safety management system is not like that, and things fall through the crack. And we go back to the Swiss cheese and the holes, and these things can lead to problems down the road. We do what we call impact assessment. So let me just go back to the International Civil Aviation Organization. Whenever they update their documentation, there must be an impact assessment as to how it would impact on the regulation within the jurisdiction of that state, and then how it impacts on those documents, and how it impacts on aviation operators, and how you send out notice to those persons. And we must have a register that we're carrying out all of these things as well. So we say impact assessment. So risk assessment and change management and document control and impact assessment. We must have procedures and registers for all of those. All right, so we'll move on to the next step. We'll talk about safety assurance. Safety assurance really underscore auditing, because within the International Civil Aviation Organization, there are standards and recommended practices, best practices that are put out by the International Civil Aviation Organization. And these are not just words on a book. They must be put in practice. They must become alive. They must be lived within the organization. So, so when we say auditing, the organization within themselves must have their internal auditing, and the recommendation have at least 4 auditing for the year, and keep your documentation and your operation up to the standard and recommended practices. So when the aviation authority come, and they normally come like 1 time a year to audit these organizations, your system is in place. Another thing that I should say that should contain in the safety manual as well is what we call safety culture and just culture. I've worked at different organizations, both in the Caribbean and also in the UK, and I've come across a situation where the safety culture, the safety culture comes under question. So sometimes we hit smaller states very hard for not maintaining their systems. But big states also have failures, because I can tell you a real example. I was working at this. I just started working at this aviation organization, and a few months after I started working, there was an audit by the aviation authority, and some simple documents could not be found. The inspector was asking, could I see the watch log for such and such date? And persons were running around like, you see the watch log? Where's the watch? They could have. It was a helter skelter sort of thing. It don't look good, and it really plays out in terms of the type of safety culture. And I can tell you that that safety culture, that organization, it was pretty much rough because my superior was telling me to do certain things, and I was like, uh-uh, that is not safe. Mm-mm, mm-mm. You can't tell the air traffic controllers to review my documentation on the night shift while they are directing plane. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. And there was a fallout. But as we say, we have to stand up for good principles. All right, so that is safety assurance. In terms of the safety manual as well, we must have what we call safety promotion. And the biggest component of safety promotion, I do not have the time to go through all the particulars. I'll put it in my book, but the biggest component is training and refresher training. And persons say like pilots, like the British Airway pilots and the American airline pilot, Boeing, Airbus, whichever aircraft you fly, from time to time they have to go in the simulator and they have to do refresher training, especially on emergency and abnormal situations. Because emergency and abnormal situations like smoke in the cockpit, fire on board, pressurization problem, these do not come up every day. But pilots, you may be flying for 10 years and you do not have an emergency. And when an emergency comes, the pilot is nervous. And because of nervous, you make even further mistakes. So the pilot have to have refresher training. So in the back of his or her mind, whenever the emergency presents itself, they can handle it. The same thing for air traffic controller, refresher training in terms of handling emergency situations. The fireman as well, from time to time, they should be out in fire practice because plane does not crash every day. But whenever they crash, you need to sort of go out there and rescue and save lives. So training, training, training. In our organization at Aviation Law Solutions, that's why I'm doing this video, a promotion. We provide training for SMS. We also provide monitoring of the International Civil Aviation Organization updates and also make recommendation to the states in terms of what legislation they need to update and also what regulation. So we have a team of air traffic controllers and engineers and also lawyers. I'm a lawyer myself as consultant that we can provide this service. So it takes some pressure off the organization and of these aviation authorities. All right. So let us move on to another topic. We should bring to attention to uh, aviation operational personnel that within most pluralistic democracies, we have what is called whistleblowing legislation. Whistleblowing legislation. So if you see anything which is unsafe out there in aviation, you're supposed to report it and make it known. And your boss, your superior, should not penalize you for that. So you should not be demoted or fired. And this whistleblowing legislation is in place for public safety because the traveling public, they get on the planes, they fly, they expect everything to be in order. And and whenever there is a messing up going on, there is a shortcoming. And I know that there are some gangsters out there. Oh, I'm not into any um informer thing. I'm not in it. No, not in. Yeah, but we should remember that gangsters own planes as well. And if a gangster is on this plane and someone say, hey, let us cook the book. We can't change out those engines. We're just gonna cook the book, and those tires, they need to fly in for the next 2 years. We're not gonna change them off. And put the gangster. The gangster don't want his plane to shell out over the Atlantic in the cold sea. He doesn't want that. The gangster was like, hey, it's my plane. I'm a gangster. I'm a gangster. Make sure you whistle blow if you see something going wrong. So the bottom line is this: all of us have a duty as operational personnel to say if there is something going wrong, we should blow the whistle. But I should tell you that it should not be done in a malicious way. There must be a sense of reasonableness. There must be a sense of rationality. There must be a sense of proportionality whenever we're doing these sort of whistleblowing. Because, as I said, the public have a legitimate expectation that when they get on a plane, that flight can be quite safe. Because what happened in Washington over the Potomac River is very, very sad. Those persons have passed, but I'm sure they have loved ones, and there are many persons um, are in grief. And we are at a stage now in terms of our technological development and our know-how in terms of system and procedures. Many a times we can do better, and we should do better. All right, so anybody need any assistance, whether you're an aviation authority or an aviation organization, get in contact with us, and we will help you to establish and maintain your safety management your safety management system as the International Civil Aviation Organization in Annex 19, talking about the continuous improvement of the SMS. So it's not something you fix and you leave it. It is continuous improvement. It must always be monitored. There must be a watchful eye over the SMS. I do not want this video to be too long, so I will end it there. But I will just say to you all out there, my love and respect.